My name is Ivy Monroe, and 3 weeks ago, I became a ghost in my own engagement party. The air was thick with jasmine and entitlement. A string quartet played something delicate and expensive in the background, probably Vivaldi, though no one was really listening. White marble floors, champagne towers, and rented florals that cost more than my first car. My mother had insisted on the club venue. "You'll thank me when you see the photos," she'd said, but I already knew I wouldn't. This party wasn't for me, it was for them. The Monroes, a family of curated smiles and surgically polished success. My father with his venture firm handshake. My sister Cassidy in her backless champagne gown, 2 flutes in hand and a camera-ready smirk. My mother drifting like silk between guests, a floating PR campaign in pearls. And Daniel. He was exactly where she wanted him to be, on the veranda, surrounded by his friends from undergrad, one hand in his pocket, one wrapped around a crystal tumbler. He looked like a man who belonged in every photo. And maybe he did. He came from a family of money, old and deep. His father was some kind of private equity monster, the kind that made calls no one refused. Daniel had the charm of a man who'd never needed to apologize for anything. I used to find that impressive. I'd been circulating the room with a practiced smile, thanking people for coming, answering the same 4 questions on repeat. How we met, grad school. How he proposed, at his family's vineyard in Sonoma. Whether I cried, no. And when the wedding was, next spring. My feet hurt in those Louboutins my sister had insisted I borrow. My dress was custom, minimalist, tasteful. I looked the part. Everyone said so. I wasn't drunk. That's the part no one tells you about moments like this. I was painfully sober. Daniel tapped his glass with a fork and called the room to attention. I heard the silver chime ripple through the conversations like a signal. My mother clapped lightly. A hush fell. "I just want to say a few words," he began, his voice warm, easy, confident like always. He was glowing. That's what my aunt whispered behind me. "He's absolutely glowing." "Ivy is..." He paused, scanning the crowd for effect. "She's my home base, my peace. The one who sees the mess behind the curtain and sticks around anyway." A few guests laughed. I didn't. "She's smart, grounded, steady." He turned to me then, raising his glass. Maybe not my first grand romance, but definitely the one that makes the most sense. There was a beat of silence, then laughs, scattered, polite, unsure at first. Then more. Someone clapped. My uncle whistled. My sister snorted into her champagne. I watched as the smile froze on my mother's face and then reshaped into something performatively pleased. I didn't move. I couldn't. Daniel leaned in, kissing my cheek like it was a prize for enduring the joke. "To Ivy," he said. My father raised his glass. "To a practical match," he agreed. There are moments when you realize the room has already decided who you are. When their laughter isn't confusion, it's confirmation. I smiled. Or something that resembled one. And then I stood. No dramatic gasp, no tears, just the sound of my chair scraping gently against the polished floor. My heels clicked softly as I walked toward Daniel. I took off the ring, not the one he proposed with, but the upgraded one my mother insisted we buy after his was deemed too modest, and placed it on the rim of his glass. His smile faltered. "Ivy?" he said, half laughing. "It's a joke. Don't be..." But I was already walking. Through the crowd, past the cellophane-perfect florals, past my mother's stiff expression and Cassidy's open mouth. I didn't stop for goodbyes. I didn't owe anyone anything. The doorman raised an eyebrow as I passed. "Your car, miss?" "No," I said. "I'll walk." Outside, the air was cold and clean. I took the long way home. I didn't cry that night. I made tea. I took off my dress like it was armor I never asked for, folded it into a dry cleaning bag, and stored it in the back of the closet. I deleted the wedding folder on my desktop. I emailed the venue and told them to release the date. Daniel didn't call. I didn't check to see if he did. Around 2 a.m, I opened a blank page in my journal and wrote, "They laughed." I didn't. That was the first truth I had written down in years. The next day, the group text blew up. My mother sent 3 messages. "Call me. This can be salvaged. Don't embarrass us further." Cassidy just sent a meme, a cartoon woman stomping out of a castle. The caption read, "When you realize you're just the backup princess." I didn't reply. My father sent nothing at all. Daniel posted a photo on Instagram later that week, him and 2 friends at the beach. Caption, "Some plans are better off changed." No mention of me. No trace of the ring. Perfect. I didn't want to be a footnote in someone else's narrative. I was done letting the world choose my plotline. So I disappeared. Not the dramatic kind, no flights to Paris, no shaved head, no Instagram detox posts. I just left. Rented a car, packed 2 bags, and drove to the one place no one in my family had stepped foot in since my grandmother died, the lake house. It had been years. The porch still creaked. The wallpaper still smelled like cedar and memory. The electricity flickered and the water heater groaned, but it was mine. The first night, I made soup from scratch. Sat barefoot on the steps with a blanket around my shoulders. No music, no phone, just air, just space, just me. I'd forgotten what silence sounded like. This is not the part where I fall apart. This is the part where I start listening to the voice I'd been taught to mute. The one that never laughed along. The one that always knew what I was worth even when no one else did. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly, barefoot, with a glass of water in one hand and a photo album in the other. Sometimes it slips between your ribs while you're reorganizing your pantry or brushing your teeth. It doesn't knock. It doesn't shout. It waits like it knows you'll make room. At the lake house, grief had its own bedroom. It moved in the first night. I hadn't been back here since my grandmother passed away. It wasn't intentional, just one of those things that gets lost in the shuffle of adult life, career, holidays, family obligations that didn't include listening to my own wants. This house, with its peeling white paint and screened porch, had once felt like the only place in the world that didn't expect me to smile on command. She'd left it to me. "Because you see the world differently," she wrote in her will, in her famously cramped handwriting. That sentence had made my mother purse her lips and say, "Well, Ivy always did prefer isolation." I found the letter on the second morning. It was in a wooden box marked Ivy, wedged in the bookshelf behind a row of gardening books no one ever read. The envelope had yellowed slightly at the edges. My name was written in her quick, sharp slant, like she didn't have time to pretend. Inside, "I hope one day you'll come back here when you need to remember who you are, not who they say you should be." There was nothing else. No signature. Just that. It hit harder than anything Daniel had ever said. I hadn't spoken to anyone since the party. My phone had buzzed twice the day after I arrived, Cassidy first. "So, you're really not going to talk about what happened?" Then again, 4 hours later, "You're being dramatic." Everyone knew it was a joke. I let the messages rot in silence. What they didn't understand, and maybe never would, was that it wasn't about the joke. It was the laughter, the ease with which they folded me back into the role I'd always been assigned. Good enough when convenient, silent when uncomfortable. A fallback, a plan B. It wasn't the first time I'd been someone's backup, not even close. There was a birthday when I was 10. Cassidy had gotten a karaoke machine. I got a used set of colored pencils and a sketch pad that still had someone else's name written in the corner. "It's about creativity," my mother had said distractedly as she arranged Cassidy's balloon arch. That same year, she told me not to wear yellow because it washed me out. Cassidy could wear anything, of course. She was the butterfly. I was the bookworm. The quiet one, the polite one, the one you didn't have to worry about because she'd manage, and manage I did. Straight A's, honors classes, art electives squeezed between calculus and physics. No one came to my science fair win. No one remembered that I got early admission to graduate school. Cassidy got a boyfriend in 10th grade, and there was a full brunch thrown. When I landed my first job at a design firm, a text from my dad. "Sounds solid. Don't forget to contribute to your 401k. Daniel was no different, just smoother. He made it feel like a partnership, like I was being invited into a world I'd always admired from a distance. He remembered things, my deadlines, my favorite wine, my dislike of cilantro. That felt intimate at the time, like proof he cared. He was funny too, not slapstick. Not crass, clever, confident. The kind of man who could hold a room without raising his voice. My mother loved that. "You're lucky," she said once, after meeting him for the third time. "Men like him don't come along often." She didn't mean kind. She meant upwardly mobile, socially acceptable. What she didn't know was that Daniel had taken Cassidy out once, years ago. Just once. They went to a formal at his college when they were both 20. My mother had set it up, said it would be good for her reputation to be seen with someone from the Easton family. Cassidy came back unimpressed. "Kind of full of himself," she said. 2 years later, he was at a networking event I attended for work. He didn't recognize me at first. I didn't remind him. We had drinks, talked about design. I thought maybe finally someone saw me. I didn't know I was just a quieter echo of a girl he already tried and failed to charm. I remembered something he said 6 months into our relationship, after we went to his family's estate in Virginia for a weekend. We were sitting on the back patio, and I'd been sketching a fountain design in my notebook. He looked over and said, "You know, you're really easy to be around. I don't have to impress you." I smiled. I thought it was a compliment. The week before he proposed, I found a tab still open on his laptop, a search for engagement rings that don't look desperate. Another tab with budget-conscious diamonds. I closed the browser. I justified it. We were saving for a house, being sensible, practical. How poetic. At the lake house, The only mirror that mattered was in the hallway, an old warped oval with a cracked corner. I stood in front of it for a long time that evening, wrapped in a sweater that belonged to my grandmother. "You were never someone's second," I whispered. The mirror didn't answer, but it didn't laugh either. Later, I poured a glass of wine and opened a blank page in my sketchbook. My fingers hesitated. I hadn't drawn for myself in months, maybe longer. Most of my work now was digital, structured, permitted, designed to fit zoning codes and corporate standards. Tonight, I let my hand move without rules. I sketched a house with no front door, just wide open windows, tall ceilings, a winding staircase that led nowhere in particular. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Around midnight, I received a message from an unknown number. "You were out of line. Everyone thought you'd be cool about it. Grow up." No name, no context, but the delivery gave it away. Daniel, the man who once said I was the most mature woman he'd ever dated. Apparently, maturity was only valuable when it came with silence. I set my phone down and stared at the fireplace. Cold, unused, covered in dust. Grabbing an old newspaper, I crumpled a few pages and lit them slowly. The fire took a minute to catch, but once it did, it burned clean and hot. I dropped the phone in the drawer where it stayed for the next 3 days. There's something strange about solitude when you stop fearing it. It starts to feel like the truth. No performances, no mirrors, no one to interrupt the sound of your own breath. By the 4th morning, I had a new routine. Coffee, firewood, sketching, no social media, no calls, no pretending. It was the first time I remembered what it felt like to live a life that wasn't designed to impress or appease anyone. They said I was Plan B, but what they didn't understand was I wasn't anyone's alternative. I was the original version of myself. They'd simply never learned how to read. The first thing I stopped doing was apologizing. Not out loud, I'd mastered the art of saying "I'm fine," long before I ever met Daniel. I meant the internal kind. The quiet, automatic apologies I used to whisper to myself every time I took up space. Sorry for being difficult. Sorry for expecting more. Sorry for not laughing. Sorry for leaving. I stopped all of it. It felt strange at first, like standing on one foot. Unsteady, a little rebellious, but then it felt like oxygen. On the 7th day, I let the lake speak first. There's a kind of conversation that only still water can hold. It doesn't ask anything of you. It doesn't rush to fill the silence. It waits, patient, clear. I'd been waking early without alarms. At first it was restlessness. Now it felt like rhythm. The sun rose slowly over the tree line, scattering gold across the water, and I sat barefoot on the edge of the dock with a mug of black coffee and a notebook. No wedding planning, no Pinterest boards, just blank pages and the sound of wind. I didn't know what I was rebuilding. I only knew I needed to do it from scratch. My grandmother used to call this the season of subtraction. She told me once during a summer I stayed with her to escape a bad college breakup, that some storms don't knock you down, they just clear the ground for better roots. "You don't owe anyone the version of yourself they're used to mistreating," she'd said, placing her hand over mine as I cried on the back porch. "Let them miss a ghost that never existed." Back then, I didn't fully understand. Now I did. It took me 4 days to find the courage to go through the box labeled miscellaneous personal. It had followed me through 3 apartments and 1 almost marriage. I never unpacked it, just carried it from corner to corner, thinking I'd deal with it when life calmed down. Life never calmed down. Inside were fragments of me, sketches from college, postcards from Florence, Polaroids of me smiling without makeup. There were letters from a professor I'd admired, an old name badge from an architecture conference I never mentioned to my family, and a sealed envelope I'd forgotten ever existed. It was from Elijah Grant. Elijah had been my brother's best friend growing up. He was 2 years older than me, quiet, funny in the kind of way that doesn't need a crowd, and a brilliant thinker. He'd gone off to Stanford and disappeared into the world of clean energy tech. We hadn't spoken in years. I remembered him most clearly in one moment. I was 16, sobbing after my mother critiqued my prom dress in front of our guests. Elijah had found me sitting on the kitchen floor, mascara smudged, humiliated. "You look like yourself," he'd said gently. I hadn't even noticed he was there. That night, he walked me to my room and told me he'd never seen anyone in our family carry themselves the way I did. "You don't perform," he'd said. "That's rare." I was too young to understand the compliment. The letter in the box was postmarked 2 years ago. "Saw your name in Architectural Digest. Not surprised. If you ever want to build something for yourself, not a client, call me. I'll fund it. No pitch required, just you being you." No phone number, just an email, neatly written in the bottom right corner. It felt like lightning in a bottle. I didn't write him that day. I didn't trust myself not to turn it into another escape hatch. But I stared at the letter for a long time, folded it back into the envelope, and slid it beneath my pillow like a secret. On day 10, I walked into town. It wasn't far. 10 minutes through woods that smelled like bark and pine and memory. I hadn't gone before, not because I was hiding, but because I hadn't felt ready to be perceived. There's a weight in being looked at, especially when you've been taught to believe your worth is a performance. But that day, I wore a navy sweater, jeans, and no makeup. My hair was still damp from the shower. I didn't dress to be seen. I dressed to be warm. The local bookstore was exactly as I remembered. Small, overstuffed, unapologetic. The kind of place that smelled like paperbacks and cinnamon. I bought a book on modern urbanism and another on solitude in design. The woman at the register blinked at the card. "Monroe," she said. "I knew your grandmother. She was quiet, but she always knew where she stood." I smiled. I'm starting to understand that about her. Back at the house, I read the book cover to cover. It asked one question on the last page. If you had to build a space for your own soul, what would it look like? I closed the book and picked up my pencil. I sketched until sunset. That night, I lit a fire and drank tea with honey and lemon. I wore wool socks and listened to an old Norah Jones album on vinyl. There was no internet out here, no cable, just static when the wind blew too hard. I didn't miss anything. In fact, I'd never felt less alone. Daniel had emailed once, just a subject line. "We should talk." No message. I archived it. My sister had posted a reel of herself doing wedding dress shopping. Her caption, "Lucky in love." I didn't watch it. My mother had left a voicemail. I played the transcript. It read, "This is beneath you, Ivy. You don't walk away from good men, especially not in public. Don't embarrass us further." I deleted it. By the second week, I started doing yoga again. Not because it was trendy or productive, but because my body had felt foreign for too long, like it belonged to someone who'd been managing optics, not emotions. I took deep breaths and moved slowly. My body responded like a room being unlocked. I had no plan, no revenge strategy, no makeover montage, no waiting for Daniel to beg. I wasn't rebuilding to prove anything to anyone. I was remembering. I was remembering who I had been before I edited myself to fit into everyone else's script. On the 15th night, I emailed Elijah. Just one line. "I'm ready to build something for myself. Want to talk?" He responded 6 hours later. "Absolutely. I never stopped hoping you'd write." I didn't know it yet, but this was the start of something that would change everything. Not because of who he was, but because I was finally choosing what I wanted. It started with a voice. Warm, steady. 2 syllables into the call, and I recognized him not from memory, but from something deeper, like hearing a familiar melody played on a new instrument. "Ivy," Elijah said. And just like that, my shoulders lowered. We hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, but his tone hadn't changed. Still patient, still measured, like he spoke in full thoughts, not performances. "I'm glad you reached out," he said. "Truly." "I wasn't sure you'd remember," I said, then winced, my old habit apologizing even when the room hadn't asked for it. "I've never forgotten you," he replied. Not sentimental, just factual. We didn't talk about Daniel. We didn't talk about my family. Instead, we talked about time, about work, about things we'd built and abandoned and circled back to. He told me about his startup, how it had grown from solar panels to designing entire carbon-negative housing units. He'd just bought land near the coast to develop a prototype community, but the designs he'd been pitched were all sterile. "Good for function," he said, "dead for the soul." "I want people to live in what we build," he told me, "not just exist inside of it." His words scratched something awake in me. "I've been sketching again," I told him. There was a pause. Then, "Can I see?" I sent him a few images from my notebook, pages I hadn't shown anyone, not even my colleagues. They weren't polished, no CAD renderings, no layers, just graphite and instinct. A roof that curved toward the sun. A living room built around silence. Hallways shaped like a winding sentence meant to be walked slowly. He didn't offer hollow praise. Just this. These are human. 2 days later, he drove 6 hours to the lake. I didn't ask him to. He didn't warn me. He just texted, "Near the old general store. Do you still like lemon scones?" I looked down at the phone, stunned. My grandmother used to bake them with me every summer. I walked to the window. His car was already in the driveway. I didn't rush to greet him. I wasn't scared. Just still. I stood there for a moment, hand lightly on the frame, watching him lean casually against the car, coffee in one hand, brown paper bag in the other. His jacket was worn, his face a little more angular than I remembered, beard slightly thicker, but the same quiet in his eyes. When I opened the door, neither of us spoke. He held up the bag. "These may not live up to your memory." "I doubt that," I said. He smiled. Not wide, not performative. Just enough. We ate scones on the porch. There was no catching up, no urgency to impress. I didn't put on makeup. He didn't scan the room. It was the first time in a long while I sat across from a man and didn't feel like I was being sized against something invisible. He told me about the land. The idea is self-sustaining, he said. Everything powered by the sun, rainwater capture, but not just eco. I wanted to feel kind, like it was built with a conscience. I laughed softly. Kind architecture, that'll get you kicked out of half the design journals. Maybe, he said, but not yours. By sunset, we'd walked the woods twice, talked about nothing and everything. I asked him what made him think of me for the project. He looked at me like it was obvious. Because you don't build for applause, he said. You build to protect something. The wind shifted, the trees rustled. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't realized how long I'd waited for someone to say that and mean it. He stayed 2 nights, not in my bed, in the guest room across the hall. Respectful distance, not avoidance. He spent most of the second day mapping out ideas on the dining table with me. Sprawled notebooks, scribbled margins, overlapping sketches. My kitchen became a workshop, my house a project site. We talked about light, space, purpose, what it meant to live in a place that didn't apologize for taking up room. I want the foundation to feel like breath, I told him, not bricks. He nodded, like the house is exhaling, not bracing itself. That night we cooked pasta with what I had in the pantry. No Instagram-worthy plating, just bowls and garlic and real conversation. He asked me if I still painted. I told him I didn't remember how. He said, "That's not true." We didn't touch. But when I passed him the pepper grinder and our fingers brushed, something lit up in the space between us, like flint against stone. He didn't flinch. He just looked at me and said, "It's good to see you." I wanted to say the same. Instead, I whispered, "It's good to feel seen." On the 3rd morning, he packed quietly. "I've got meetings in DC," he said, "but I'll be back in a week, if you'll still have me." I walked him to the door. His hand brushed mine again. Not a grab, not a claim. Just a reminder that he was there. After he left, the silence felt different. Not empty, charged, like a page waiting for its next line. I checked my email later that night. Daniel had written again. "So, I guess this is it?" No greeting, no apology. Just that one question. I didn't respond, but I clicked the archive button with more clarity than I thought possible. I wasn't anyone's fallback. Not anymore. And maybe, just maybe, I was about to start building something that didn't just hold me, but reflected me. Revenge doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it slips through the cracks, soft as morning light. It grows roots in the dark. It waits. It does not announce itself. It builds. And one day, the people who laughed realize they haven't seen you fall. They've just lost sight of how high you've climbed. The following week unfolded like a blueprint. Precise, measured, intentional. Elijah and I started work on the community designs in earnest. We called it Haven, not because it sounded poetic, but because it was the only word that fit. A space built for protection, not performance. The project wasn't loud, no press releases, no LinkedIn announcements, just long hours, coffee-stained sketches, and conversations about quiet dignity in architecture. We wanted the walls to breathe. We wanted corners that hugged you, not corridors that punished you. And we wanted the people inside to feel like they mattered, even if the world had told them they didn't. It felt radical. To build something that didn't center wealth or spectacle, just honesty. I spent the mornings drawing in silence, barefoot in the lake house, pencil dancing across textured paper. I started painting again too, at first with hesitation, then with abandon. My hands remembered more than my mind did. Strokes became muscle memory. Colors found their place. By the 3rd canvas, I stopped asking myself whether the work was good. It just was. It existed. That was enough. Elijah returned, as promised. Not just to work, but to stay. He didn't move in. He just never stopped arriving. Each day he came with questions, ideas, tea, wildflower honey, and once unexpectedly a small leather sketchbook. "I saw it in a shop downtown," he said. "Made me think of you." Inside the first page he had written, "For the things only you can design." I didn't cry, but I held the book like it was air. We didn't label what was growing between us. There were no declarations, no timelines, no need to define the thing to prove it was real. Instead, we listened, observed. I told him about the party, about the ring on the glass, about how they all laughed and how I didn't. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes, just let me speak. And when I finished, he only said, "They mistook your silence for permission." We worked late that night. Moonlight spilled across the floor. Our hands overlapped on the drafting table. His touch never asked for more, it simply answered. And I realized something in that moment. I wasn't broken. I was becoming. 2 days later, a notification popped up. Cassidy had posted a new photo of her with Daniel. Smiling, flawless, captioned, "Always meant to be." The comments were flooded with congratulations. I stared at it for exactly 11 seconds. Then I turned my phone over and went back to designing a skylight that filtered warmth into a library nook, because that's what I did now. I designed for light. A week after that, my mother called. I didn't pick up. The voicemail transcribed itself quietly on my screen. Cassidy and Daniel are having a small celebration this weekend. He'd love to see you're doing well. We all would. Let's move forward. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the assumption that I'd come back to the table that once served me scraps. Elijah saw the message later that night as I scrubbed a pan in the kitchen, jaw tight. "You okay?" he asked. I handed him the phone. He read it, then met my eyes. "You don't owe them your presence." I didn't reply. But that night I opened the email invitation and RSVP'd. Yes, not because I wanted to forgive them, but because I wanted them to see the woman they failed to break. The next 3 days were about preparation, not of appearance, but of energy. I wasn't choosing a dress to impress them. I was choosing armor that didn't look like armor. I wore slate gray, soft fabric, high neckline, clean lines, understated earrings, but I carried myself like a woman who'd stopped asking for permission. Elijah didn't come with me. He didn't need to. This moment was mine. The venue was smaller this time, boutique rooftop garden, lots of glass, too much curated ivy. Cassidy liked things that appeared organic but were perfectly controlled. When I arrived, people turned, not dramatically, not with gasps, but with that half-second hesitation that says, she shouldn't look this calm. Cassidy wore white, not bridal white, just the shade that pretends it isn't pretending. Daniel stood beside her, drink in hand, jaw slightly clenched. "Wow," Cassidy said, brushing air kisses past my cheek. "You look rested." "Peaceful," I replied. "It suits me." Daniel didn't speak right away, just stared. Then finally, "Didn't think you'd come." "I wanted to see the ending," I said. "Sometimes it helps close the book." My mother tried to usher me toward a group of investors. My father nodded politely from across the room. But I didn't engage. I walked the space like someone auditing a blueprint. Too many angles, no warmth. The whole place was a metaphor for the life they'd tried to script me into. All facade, no foundation. Daniel caught up with me near the bar. "You really disappeared," he said. "Kind of dramatic, don't you think?" I turned toward him. My voice didn't rise. "I didn't disappear. I just stopped orbiting people who mistake disrespect for charm." His lips parted, maybe to defend himself, maybe to apologize. I didn't wait to find out. As I walked toward the exit, someone called my name. One of Daniel's cousins, a venture guy. "Hey, Ivy, wasn't there? Talk of you doing something with Elijah Grant. I heard he's funding a new community out east." I paused, smiled. "Not funding?" I said. "Partnering?" The silence that followed was sweet. I left before the questions started. Later that night, I returned to the lake house. Elijah was on the porch, 2 mugs of tea already waiting. "You went?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't pry, just offered me my cup. "How'd it feel?" he said. "Like I wasn't made of glass anymore," I said. "Like I didn't shatter in their hands." And in that moment, I knew. They would remember me, not for the scene I didn't make, but for the quiet power I didn't ask their permission to claim. Power doesn't need to scream. Sometimes it shows up in the folds of a press release. Sometimes it echoes through a room without ever raising its voice. And sometimes, if you're paying close attention, it arrives wrapped in soft linen and calm posture, smiling like it's always belonged there. That was the kind of power I stepped into. Not gifted, not granted, claimed. Quietly, completely. It started with a headline. Eco Haven, the first human-centered carbon-negative community in the Northeast, led by Ivy Monroe. Under it, my name. Not as a designer, not in small print under some man's vision, but as the lead architect, co-founder, and creative force behind the entire development. The photo was one Elijah took on my second week back at the lake house. I was standing barefoot on the porch, coffee in one hand, sketchbook in the other. It wasn't styled, it wasn't edited, it looked like me, like the woman I used to dream I'd become before life convinced me to shrink. The article ran in 2 design journals, then 3 more picked it up. By the end of the week, my inbox was overflowing requests for interviews, collaboration offers, architecture magazines asking for comment. My assistant, hired just a month prior, gently suggested we set up a press kit. I laughed, not because I was surprised, but because for once I wasn't. Elijah stayed calm through all of it. While my phone buzzed and the attention mounted, he never once tried to insert himself into the spotlight. "It was always going to be you," he said. We were on the deck when he said it, watching the sun settle behind the trees. He was barefoot too. The backs of our hands touched. I looked at him for a long time before replying. "No," I said. "It was always going to be her. The girl who walked out of that party? The woman who built herself after it." A week later, I received a formal invitation to a charity gala, the same one Daniel's family co-hosted every spring. My name wasn't in the guest list as a +1 this time. It was in bold. Keynote speaker, Ivy Monroe, architect and visionary. I stared at the card for nearly an hour, not because I needed to think, but because it felt like symmetry. I didn't tell anyone I was attending. Not my mother, not Cassidy, not Daniel, not even the people at the firm I just quietly parted ways with. Some exits don't require slamming the door. Some just involve building a better house across the street. The night of the gala, I wore black. Not out of mourning, out of memory. A tailored suit, silk-lined, open-backed, feminine without apology, sharp without aggression. It wasn't revenge dressing, it was return armor. The kind you wear when you walk into the room that tried to forget you existed, and make it look like you own it now. The event was at a hotel in the city, glass walls, rooftop bar, curated music. The kind of place where people drank wine they couldn't pronounce and made connections they didn't deserve. I arrived exactly 6 minutes after the doors opened. Not early, not late, just intentional. When I stepped through the lobby, the silence was invisible but tangible. I felt the air shift, the eyes find me, not immediately with recognition, but with curiosity, and then realization. Cassidy was the first to approach. Her hair was curled, her dress metallic, her smile stretched like cellophane, tight, shiny, breakable. "Ivy," she said, "you look different." "I am," I replied. She blinked, recalibrated. "And Daniel?" My head tilted. "What about him? Is he coming?" I smiled. I wouldn't know. I left her standing there. My speech wasn't long. 12 minutes. I talked about dignity in design, about creating spaces that don't punish people for being soft, about how the future of architecture isn't just in materials, but in how we make people feel inside the walls they live in. I said nothing about Daniel, nothing about that party. I didn't need to, because every word I said, every click of the microphone, every glance of the audience was proof I had outgrown the smallness they once caged me in. Afterward, people gathered, congratulated, photographed. Daniel stood near the back of the room, alone. He didn't speak, didn't approach, but I saw the weight in his stare. Not jealousy, not admiration, recognition. He finally saw what I had become, because now the whole room did. Later, as the crowd thinned and the bar wound down, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned. Elijah, dressed in midnight blue. Simple, strong, understated, just like him. He hadn't told me he was coming. He didn't have to. "Thought you might need a ride," he said. "I drove," he smiled. "Then let me walk you to the car." We didn't say much on the way down. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't absence. It was arrival. Before I got in, I looked up at him. "Do you think they understood tonight?" I asked. Elijah shrugged, hands in his pockets. "Does it matter?" I paused. "No," I said. "Not really." He leaned in, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "They don't need to understand it. They just need to remember it." The irony of being forgotten is that the moment you stop needing them, they remember you, and not gently. Not because they've changed, but because the world has. And suddenly the woman they once ignored is the woman they need. The calls started 3 days after the gala. First was Cassidy. "Hey, just wanted to say, you killed it the other night. I mean, wow, so proud of you." No mention of the party. No mention of the ring. No mention of how her laughter rang out across crystal glasses like a gunshot when Daniel said the words. She was never plan A. I let the call go to voicemail, then deleted it. Next came my mother, a text, 3 lines, no punctuation. "Very impressed by the article. Let's catch up soon. Maybe lunch at the club?" The same club where she once told me I should tone down the creative talk because it made men feel small. I archived the message. No reply. Then came Daniel, an email, no subject line, just 1 sentence. "I owe you an apology." I read it twice, not because I believed it, but because part of me wanted to see if the tone had changed. It hadn't. It wasn't regret. It was reach. A hand extended not in remorse, but in reaction. He was losing grip. 2 days later, a lawyer from his firm reached out. Politely. Professionally. "We'd love to feature your design firm in a collaborative bid for the Waterfront Urban Renewal Project." I laughed. Out loud. Not bitter. Just honest. Because months ago, I would have rearranged my schedule, polished my tone, asked for my seat. Now, I had a table. I didn't need theirs. The requests didn't stop. A design school I was rejected from the postgrad now wanted me for their keynote. A firm that passed on my application last year emailed me to connect. My high school art teacher, who once told me, "Sketching houses is sweet, but be realistic," shared my article on Facebook with the caption, "She always had it in her," as if their doubt had never been spoken. I began to understand something Elijah had said once. They don't hate who you are. They hate that you became it without them. Meanwhile, Haven was moving. Our site was approved, environmental assessments cleared, permits granted. Elijah and I spent our mornings on calls and our afternoons in studio space we rented in the city, minimalist, sun-drenched, quiet. He built the numbers, I built the lines. And in between, we built something that had no name, but didn't need one. People assumed we were together. We didn't correct them. Not because we owed them an answer, but because we didn't owe them anything at all. One evening, I got home from the studio to find a box on the porch. No note, no return address. Inside, the engagement ring. Daniel's. Mine. The one I left on the table when I walked out of that party. It sat in a velvet box like it still mattered, like it hadn't once burned a hole through my finger. I held it for exactly 6 seconds, then walked it to the lake, dropped it in. Not with drama, just finality. It sank silently, and I didn't feel a thing. The next morning, Elijah found me sketching by the dock. He didn't ask what happened, just handed me a coffee and said, "You look lighter." I nodded. "I am." That night, I posted a photo on Haven's social media. Just a hand holding one of the concept models, open sky corridors, circular roof, a tree planted in the center courtyard. The caption read, "Built for those who were told to shrink." It went viral. Overnight, women from across the country flooded the comments. I needed this. I've never felt more seen. This makes me want to start over. And just like that, the story became something bigger than me. It wasn't about Daniel or Cassidy or any table I wasn't invited to sit at. It was about every person who had ever been told to lower their voice, narrow their dreams, or wait their turn. It was about the ones who walked out quietly and then built cathedrals out of the silence. The next evening, Elijah knocked softly on my door. "I got a call," he said, "from a journalist. Big outlet, they want a joint feature." "Us?" I asked. He nodded. "You, actually. I'll be quoted. You'll be profiled." I exhaled. Not with fear, with certainty. "I'm ready," I said, but just as he turned to go, he stopped. "By the way, I got another call." I looked up. "From Daniel." My jaw tightened. "What did he say?" Elijah shrugged. "Didn't get that far. Told him he had the wrong number." We laughed, and for the first time, I didn't hear a trace of old wounds in my laughter. Only wind, and water, and the quiet power of a woman who'd stopped performing. There's a moment in healing where the anger fades, not because the wound didn't matter, but because you've outgrown the people who caused it. You stop waiting for them to understand. You stop needing them to apologize. You realize they already lost access to you, and that was the consequence. I didn't plan to see Daniel again, but the world is small when it wants to be, especially when your name starts appearing in places you used to only scroll through with envy. This time, it wasn't a party. It was a panel. The city's Department of Urban Strategy was hosting a roundtable on sustainable design. Someone on the board had read about Haven. They wanted me on stage. I said yes, not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I no longer avoided places where my past might show up. I carried myself into them now. The auditorium was glass and steel, cold angles, harsh lines. Ironically, the kind of space I no longer designed. I wore cream. No makeup but lip balm, a simple watch, clean lines, calm shoulders. The moderator introduced the speakers alphabetically. Daniel was third. I was fifth. His voice was steady, his smile rehearsed. He spoke about efficiency, metrics, carbon targets, all the buzzwords. When it was my turn, I stepped up and said something simple. Efficiency doesn't matter if people can't breathe inside their own lives. Silence. Then a ripple of applause. Not thunderous, but real. The kind that reaches past politeness and touches something felt. Afterward, people approached me. One woman in particular, mid-60s, wore linen and kindness. She said, "I live in one of your trial units, Haven's pilot build. I didn't know who designed it until now. I just wanted to say thank you. I sleep through the night now." She didn't mean it metaphorically. She meant literally. And I felt my throat catch. Because no award ever hit as hard as that. Daniel hovered, watching. When the crowd thinned, he finally came over. "Ivy?" he said. My name didn't sound right in his mouth anymore. Too unfamiliar. "Congratulations," he added. "You've built something incredible." I nodded. "Thank you." He looked like he wanted to say more. Maybe about the ring, the calls, the emails I never replied to. Maybe about that night when I walked out in front of everyone and left silence in my place. But I didn't give him the stage. "I hope you're well," I said, genuinely. That shook him more than if I'd screamed. After that, I turned and left. Didn't look back, didn't need to. Some exits are loud, some are quiet, and some are so dignified they become doorways. Back at the lake house, Haven was preparing for Phase 2. A second location, twice the size, funded by a global sustainability grant we hadn't even applied for. They reached out to us. Elijah and I worked late that night, sitting on the floor, surrounded by sketches and tea mugs and the soft hum of Norah Jones on vinyl. At one point, I looked up and said, "Do you ever miss the chaos?" He laughed. "God, no." Then, "But I do miss the clarity of building from nothing." I nodded. "But now we're building towards something." He asked me if I wanted to visit the pilot site again, this time with him, to walk through the homes, meet the people, see what our blueprints had become in flesh and laughter. We drove up the next day. The houses were warm even in rain. Children played barefoot in the courtyards. Someone was painting on their porch. A father hung herbs above his stove. It was life not curated. I stood in one of the kitchens, fingers brushing the window frame I'd designed, and realized this wasn't revenge anymore. This was reclamation. A week later, my mother called again. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was softer now. "I'm proud of you, Ivy. I know we don't say that enough, or at all. I hope you'll let us in, someday." I listened to it, twice, then deleted it. Not from spite, but from peace. Cassidy text. Just a photo. Her wedding dress. Returned. Caption. "Guess some plan A's don't work either." I stared at it, then blocked her, because I didn't need her sadness as validation. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't wait for apologies. It just moves on without them. 2 weeks later, I had dinner with an investor. Big name, bigger checkbook. He'd seen Haven's pilot, wanted to franchise it globally. Elijah and I listened politely, then declined, because Haven wasn't for mass production. It was for meaning. We wouldn't dilute it for scale. That night, Elijah walked me home from the restaurant. The streets were quiet. A light breeze made the leaves flicker like memory. At the door, I asked, "Do you ever wonder how all of this even happened?" He shrugged. "You walked out of a room, Ivy. That's how it started." "No," I said. "I stopped asking for space. I started designing it." He kissed me, not with urgency, with understanding. And it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like continuity, like everything was exactly where it should be. Legacy doesn't always come with a crown. Sometimes it arrives in envelopes you didn't request. Sometimes it calls you to stages built by people who once dismissed you. And sometimes it brings your past to the front row, uninvited. The envelope was heavy, cream, embossed seal. Inside, a letter on thick paper, polite, formal, stunning. The State Design Council is proud to announce your selection as this year's recipient of the Human Impact in Architecture Award. The ceremony will take place at the Capitol Theater. Your presence is requested. I read the letter twice, then laid it flat on the table and stared out the window. Not in disbelief, in recognition. This was what it felt like to be seen without begging. Elijah was already reading my expression when I handed it over. He smiled. Just a little. I guess they finally figured out what the rest of us already knew. I didn't respond. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wasn't. Not anymore. The award wasn't about the buildings, not really. It was about what they did to people, how they held them, healed them, gave them space to take off armor without asking why they wore it in the first place. News of the award spread quickly, too quickly. It showed up in papers, then on the local news, then online, shared by people who once told me to stop dreaming so hard. Cassidy posted the headline with a heart emoji. "So proud of my girl Ivy. Knew she'd do big things." I didn't message her. She hadn't called me my girl since sophomore year, when she told everyone I wasn't wife material because I cared more about drafting tables than dating. Then the text came, from my mother. "We'd love to attend the ceremony. Your father's getting a new suit. Let us know where to sit." Let us know where to sit, as if this was a family dinner, as if they hadn't once sat around a table and laughed when I was humiliated. I didn't reply. 3 days before the event, Daniel messaged. Short, predictable. "Congrats. Maybe we can catch up after?" No pressure. It wasn't the message that surprised me. It was the fact that it didn't sting. I read it like I was scanning a stranger's resume. Detached, clinical, like reading the history of someone who used to live here. The ceremony was held in the oldest hall in the city, ornate ceilings, velvet chairs, gold trim no one asked for. I wore navy blue, structured, clean neckline. No jewelry, except for a small silver ring I'd bought myself on the day Haven's second phase broke ground. I wasn't dressing to impress. I was dressing to remember. Elijah sat beside me, not holding my hand, not posing, just there. Solid, kind, certain. We didn't speak as they called the names. Finalists, honorees. Then, and this year's recipient of the Human Impact in Architecture Award? I stood. Not fast, not showy, just enough. The applause felt real. Not loud, but long. The stage was wide, but I didn't feel small on it. I stepped to the podium, looked out, scanned the room. 3rd row, left aisle. My parents? Cassidy, Daniel, they weren't whispering now. They weren't laughing. They were still, contained, watching a version of me they no longer had the vocabulary for. My speech was short. I talked about space, about how good architecture listens, how it doesn't just house people, it honors them. We live in a world that tells people to make themselves smaller, quieter, more tolerable. Good design says the opposite. You belong here, exactly as you are. Silence, then standing applause. My parents rose too, but I didn't look at them. Afterward, people swarmed, cameras, microphones, colleagues, and then through the crowd, Daniel, alone. He approached slowly, didn't speak right away. Then, "You were incredible." I nodded. "Thank you." A pause. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "I was stupid, insecure, trying to be clever." "You were cruel," I corrected. "Calm, even." And they laughed because they thought I wouldn't leave. His eyes lowered. "I wish I had been someone worth staying for." I let the silence stretch. "I'm glad you weren't," I said. "Otherwise, I'd never have become this." He stepped back. Didn't argue, didn't ask for more. Just nodded once, then faded into the crowd. Later, my parents found me. My mother smiled too wide. "You've really made something of yourself." "I did," I said, "without needing permission." She started to reply. I walked away. Outside, the air was cold. Elijah offered me his jacket. I didn't take it. I didn't need the warmth. Not tonight. Tonight, I was my own fire. Revenge is never the point. Not really. The point is to become someone so whole, so complete in your own skin, that even the memory of who hurt you no longer fits inside the home you've made of yourself. It's been 8 months since the award, a year and 3 weeks since I took off the ring. I remember the sound it made on the glass. Clean. Final. Not like a crash, more like punctuation. The end of one sentence, the beginning of a better one. Haven's second site just finished its first round of move-ins. We stood at the edge of the property as the sun rose. Elijah handed me coffee. The mug was chipped. The moment wasn't. Kids rode scooters over the new brick paths. An old woman planted rosemary outside her front door. Someone laughed from an open window. It didn't sound like escape. It sounded like arrival. I walked the grounds barefoot. I wanted to feel what we built. Concrete warmed by morning light. Wood that didn't creak like old grief. Walls with breathing room. Windows that didn't ask to be cleaned, just looked through. One woman stopped me by the community library. "You're Ivy, right?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled. "Thank you for this." I said nothing, just squeezed her hand. Because sometimes you don't need to explain the thing that saved you. You just share it. Back home, my lake house still smelled like lemon oil and paper. The plants were thriving. The floors scratched in places. The table covered in sketches for Haven 3. Elijah cooked more now. He never made it a statement. He just filled the kitchen with garlic and jazz and presents. Some nights we worked in the same room and didn't speak for hours. Other nights we danced in the dark like teenagers with too much history and no need to explain it. We never said forever. We didn't need to. He was home, and I was finally someone who knew how to be inside one. Daniel moved out of state. I didn't follow. Didn't care. Cassidy opened a boutique for minimalist wedding decor. She tried to send me a reconnect request. I didn't even decline it. Some doors don't slam shut. They just don't open anymore. My parents sent a card for my birthday. It said, "Proud of you. Love, Mom and Dad." It didn't sting. It didn't warm me either. It just was. And I was okay with that. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't walked out that night. If I'd laughed along, let the ring stay, shrunk myself for the comfort of people who never bothered to know me, but I did leave. And that changed everything. Not because it made them hurt, but because it made me real. The local university asked me to teach a course next spring, architecture and empathy. They want me to design the syllabus. I said yes, because if I can help even one woman design her own foundation before someone tells her she's too much, it'll be worth every second. One evening, while watching the lake roll in and out like a heartbeat, Elijah sat beside me and asked, "Do you still think about that night?" I didn't have to ask which one. "No," I said, then paused. "Not with pain." He nodded. "That's how you know you made it out." I looked at the sky. It was soft. The color of forgiveness you don't need to give out loud. The kind that lives in your spine. The world never apologized to me. Not Daniel. Not my family. Not the people who laughed. And that's okay. Because I built a life so rooted their absence feels like grace. And when people ask me now who I am, I don't hand them a resume. I show them what I've made. The homes. The light. The silence I filled with everything I was told to hide. I am no one's plan B. I am my own blueprint. And I don't need a witness to prove I made it. I only need to breathe. And I do. Fully. Freely. Finally. That's all for this story. I'll be back with another one. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It motivates me to create more content like this.